and welcome back to the Our Moment podcast. It's me again, Exquisite, your host, and we are finally about to delve into part 3 Discord. But first, I'd like to say hi, welcome back. I hope you guys have all had a good week, and happy Thanksgiving, because this is coming out the week of Thanksgiving. So if you're listening to this in America, I hope you're having a very good Thanksgiving. Or if you're listening in Canada, I hope you had a good Thanksgiving like 2 weeks ago. And I'm very thankful for all the people who listen to this podcast. I would like to say that hopefully you may have heard an advertisement before this podcast. So I'd really like to thank you for listening to that. That means I've been sponsored, which means the more people who listen, I might get some money in the bank, which will go towards being able to talk more about these books and get paid for it. And I think we all as people want to get paid for our work. Even though I'm not really doing this for money, I'm kind of just doing it to kind of have a fun time with you guys and all that. So, yeah. So, hi. So, we are in part 3, and part 3 is about Root. And once again, we'll have 2 episodes, and then we'll have an episode where I just give a summary and breakdown of everything that went down in the thing. But these episodes, I'm the shorter ones, these smaller ones that come before the episode breakdown, I kind of want to talk about some special topics. So if you listen to some of the previous episode, I kind of explained to you what root is. Root is the same thing as ether, but root is what the natural practitioners call it, right? So at the end of part 2, we have Patricia being like, "Don't worry, Bree, I'm going to teach you root because I feel like I owe you and I need to teach you." And she takes Bree with her on a spirit walk. And we're not going to get into that spirit walk because, hello, major spoilers. I'm so sorry. I'm like a little pig. Anyway, so Patricia kind of tells, but what we need to do is, we need to go a little bit more into root and get more into, this is where the heavier themes of oppression come in. So with root, these are the magic that's passed down maternally by Black mothers to their children or grandmothers to their granddaughters. And typically it only goes to female characters. We don't know if later on in the series, Miss Deanna is going to be like, "Hey, look, there's a male practitioner." I mean, she's done some other stuff that I won't say because, spoiler alert. So I'm not going to do that. But I kind of want to get into a little bit of the history of slavery in the South. So we all know that there was the transatlantic slave trade, which is the idea of, one second. Sorry, guys. The transatlantic slave trade was when slaves were taken from Africa to the U.S. and to the Caribbean. And typically, if it was in the South, it was all about, we're here to help collect cotton. That's why they took the slaves and they sold them. And when they did that, they definitely ripped apart families. They ripped apart whole livelihoods, and it was kind of this super terrible time, and it's a dark time in American history as well. And we all know that the Civil War went and ended that one, then we had to do the whole civil rights movement. But what we don't really discuss is the way in which that's still affecting all of us to this day. A lot of the Black people that walk around in the South, or even all over the United States, these African-American people, our history is entwined in the buildings and in the ground, because it's our people did build this, and now we have to deal with the repercussions and the difficulties of knowing I'm in this building. And once again, I mentioned before, she goes, Bree goes in places, she's like, "Oh yeah, this obviously wasn't meant for me." But it's like I'm in this building and I know my people built this place. What do I do? Where do I go from here, you know? And it's kind of like this really sobering type idea. And so, while not going into too many spoilers, I think I mentioned that there is in the book in at UNC Chapel Hill in the book. I'm not sure if this is the same at the actual place because I've never actually visited, but there are a bunch of unmarked graves for the slaves and the black people who helped build UNC Chapel Hill. And Brianna's like, we're really walking over all these people. And she's like, don't worry about it. We'll thank them, and we'll help them. Like we'll give back to them for letting us talk with them, you know? And it's like, wow, that's a really sobering idea that I'm walking on graves as we speak. Or I don't know, I'm on campus and I could be walking on graves and I'm walking on stolen land and I'm aware of all this. And all this is Miss Young kind of uses to focus in on her story and also to help focus in on the magic, right? We're getting in a lot of to ideas of like colonization and imperialism of like we wouldn't have to deal with a lot of things we deal with now if those like ultimate acts of evil hadn't been committed. And like not this is a mini spoiler, but the root crafters know about the ether users and they know what they do and they know that, oh, technically they're good people or whatever. But they're like, of course they're there to fight the demons, but they kind of cause the demons. Like they've done enough harm that the discord that the demons come out and feed on, they are the ones who created it. So it's like for the root crafters, they want to avoid them. They want to like not have to deal with them at all. So yeah, so it was like it's this kind of crazy thing in a sense of wow, there's a lot going on here. Yeah, so and Brianna, we know, and this is not a spoiler because if you've listened this far, you know for a fact the order has been around for 15 centuries, and that is 15 centuries of violence. A lot of them have perpetrated. We know that they used to kill off. I'm sorry, y'all. I've been kind of going through it. This change in weather has been sending your host terribly. It's been treating me awfully. So we are just gonna have to deal with that because I am so struggling, y'all. But no, so that's 15 centuries of allowing things to happen and using it to further themselves and their own and their own goals, right? So and Bree in this section really takes in a lot of the trauma that have been done to her people. She looks around and she sees monuments to men who she knows for a fact they committed horrendous acts of violence to her people or to other black people that she may not be related to. Because once again, Bree doesn't know a lot about her own history. In fact, in this section, she's kind of confronted with all the things that she does not know about her people and where they come from and all like the type of magic that she inherited from them. And it's not even just magic. Like if we're being real, one of the big factors, one of the real problems with the transatlantic slave trade, and one of the ultimate evils I like to say that comes from it is the lack of knowledge of our people. Like a lot of us can't go further back than a certain things, or the fact that my last name Williams, I always say at the beginning of this, but it's kind of like that's a very like it's super common, but if you think about it, why is it so common? Because so many of us like my ancestors had to take on their slave owners' last name. Why do you think the last name Jefferson is so common among black people? Because Thomas Jefferson had so many slaves and had children with so many of those slaves. And when you are a slave, you cannot consent. So let's put two and two together. I'm not going to say it out loud because I will not risk getting in trouble, right? But it's still there. It's that like then we cannot just wipe away from our history. And if we were to wipe that away, we cannot learn from it. It's awful that it happened, and it's awful that we still have to live with the repercussions of it. But if we don't talk about it and discuss it at all, then it's like, are we really going to learn? Did we really learn anything at all? And I realized that I'm not even going into super detail of like, and I could get even further. Like I really could. So actually, let's get into a little bit of the history of slavery in North Carolina specifically. Now, I am not from North Carolina. I'm from the Deep South. I'm from Georgia, and my family's from Louisiana. But slavery has been around in North Carolina's history since it was first settled by the Europeans. Well, since it was settled in 1600s and early 1700s, right? Many of the first slaves in North Carolina were brought in to the colony from the West Indies or the surrounding colonies, but a significant amount were actually bought from Africa. Now, because of North Carolina's geography, it didn't originally play a large part in the early slave trade. There's this string of islands that make up the Outer Banks of North Carolina. Haha, shout out Outer Banks Netflix. Which I haven't seen, but I hear is great. That kind of made it too dangerous for slave ships to land in North Carolina. So most of those slave ships decided to land everywhere else and then come down, right? The colony also didn't have a very extensive plantation system, much in like a lot of the lower colonies. So when Carolina itself first split into North and South, in 1729, North Carolina had about 6,000 slaves, which is a fraction of what was had in South Carolina. But then as the plantation system expanded across the lower South, many northern slaves were sold south to help deal with the northern ones, right? Now, a lot of extensive records weren't kept, which you'll notice, if you study anything about slavery, you'll notice is pretty common. They didn't really keep extensive, records of where we came from or things like that. They just kind of, happened. And it's important to note these things because it talks about the type of inhumane treatment that a lot of slaves got because they weren't considered human. So it was, more extensive records were kept on, cows and horses, right? But by 1767, there were 40,000 slaves, and about 90% of these slaves were field workers who performed agricultural jobs. So you can see that's kind of a lot. There are records that exist with the colonial laws that the white people enacted to control the slaves. And one of the first set of these laws was called the North Carolina Slave Code of 1715, which required all slaves to carry a ticket from their master whenever they left the house. The ticket stated where they were traveling and the reason for their travel, and the 1715 code also prevented slaves from gathering in groups for any reason, including religious worships, and required whites to help capture runaway slaves. Then there was a second set of even stricter laws in 1741, and these laws kind of prevented slaves from raising their own livestock and from carrying guns without their master's permission, even for hunting. It also limited freeing slaves. It said that a master could only free a slave for meritorious service, even though the decision had to be approved by the country court. And the most ominous law was really the runaway slave law. It stated that if runaways refused to surrender immediately, they could be killed and there would be no legal consequences, right? So after the Revolution, the ban on importing slaves to North Carolina was lifted in 1790, and the state's slave population jumped. So by the 1800s, there was 140,000 enslaved people in North Carolina. Now, some of them, around the population of black people in North Carolina did include some free black people, but majority of them were slaves who were working in agriculture at small to medium-sized farms. And a lot of these slaves helped build UNC Chapel Hill. And it's kind of and I say all of this, and I go into this history of North Carolina slave trade because not only is the setting of the story on stolen ground, it's also on blood-soaked ground. And Tracy Deonn does an important part of connecting this with root, because the slaves had to find a way to like defend themselves and take care of themselves. And the way in which they did this was by practicing rootcraft and passing it down. So for our main character, Brianna, who does not know the rootcraft, she doesn't have it, it's kind of like, oh, what happened in her family that they can't access that, right? And we don't know. And we actually don't even find out till the end of the book, which I will be talking about way later on in this podcast. We still got part 3 to go through. But yeah, no, so it's like there's this history of exploitation and like heinous acts, and Bree is dealing with all of this just for the fact that she's on campus. She already has to deal with that history. Like, I feel like a lot of Black students who go to predominantly white institutions, myself included, when we're at these places, it's kind of like we have the weight of, you know, this wasn't originally built for people like me. It was built by people who look like me, but it wasn't built for us. And it's kind of like that weight follows you around. It's almost like being haunted a little bit. And Bree feels that, and she feels that extra because guess what? She can see it. She can interact with these, like, she's interacting with these people around people. She knows magic is real, and she knows that they're all descendants and they can track their bloodlines, but she can't track hers. And that's why it's super important. I mentioned earlier, she said that she's the scion of her family. She's the lead of her family. She takes point in her family. And she's got to be there to uphold her family's legacy because for a long time they weren't even permitted to have that. So yeah, and part 3 really, really, really gets into that. And it gets into like bloodlines and blood gifts significantly. Especially because from part 3 we kind of run into part 4. Like part 3, we are rolling. Like we get rolling quick. And there's a lot to go. There's a lot of stuff to talk about. So yes, that's all I wanted to say today. This is a shorter episode, but it's important. And it was a bit of a downer, sorry. You know, talking about slavery and things like that always tends to be a little bit of a it's sad because you don't want to accept, or even like, we have to acknowledge it, but it's hard to imagine the depths of violence that slavery actually consists of and insists upon. Like, when you take away someone's human rights to live and to be alive and to be an active human being, that's trauma involved in it. And it's a trauma that a lot of African American people have to live with whenever we go anywhere, especially in the South. But yes, thank you so much for listening. I hope you all have a great day. Have a fantastic Thanksgiving. Think about what I said. We're on stolen lands. Think about, like, when we're talking about Thanksgiving, I think it's also kind of like relevant that I'm talking about slavery now, this week of Thanksgiving, for everybody. Just think about that. I know I'm thankful for the fact that I am alive today, and for the almost thousands of people who had to survive in order for me to be thriving and to be living. So I'm thankful for that. Please let me know what you are thankful for in the comments. I'll see you all next week when we go into another part of part 3. Once again, you can follow me at Exquisite WIL on Twitter, at Exquisite Williams on Instagram, and at Exquisite Williams on YouTube. If you're already listening to this on YouTube, like, comment, and subscribe. That will be very helpful for me in getting this podcast out there. I would love to say Tracy Dion knows of this podcast's existence, and she was like, thank you for spending so much time with the book. And I'm just like, thank you for writing this book. Are you crazy? If you hear any ads, do me a favor and listen to those. They shouldn't be that long. And typically, I will be the one who's kind of giving that advertisement. So yes, thank you very much. I really, really, really appreciate all of you guys. I'm very thankful for y'all. And once again, you can follow Our Moment Podcast at Our Moment Pod on Twitter.